This is the comprehensive guide that you're gonna need to breed your Neocaridina shrimp to a point where they make you good profits so it can pay for the expansion of your fish room. I'm Brady Nichols, the aquarium guy. Let's get into it. My entire goal is to be able to teach everyday hobbyists that they can just change a few small things about their way they keep their fish and it can turn into a profit. So the hobby doesn't cost them money, it makes them money. So if you have any color of Neocaridina shrimp or you're about to buy in, listen to these exact steps and you will make the fastest way to profit from here forwards. The first and most important part of this whole game is the actual size of the tank that you're keeping. So obviously if you have a small tank, it's only gonna be able to house a small amount of shrimp. So your goal is to get a large tank. Here's the sizes. If you're gonna go out and start fresh with between 20 and 50 shrimp, start with a 2-foot tank while you get ready to buy your 4-foot tank. That 2-foot tank means that your shrimp will actively breed. They're not gonna be kilometers away from each other in shrimp land, and you can control the population a lot more. That 2-foot tank's goal is only to grow up to a point that you can plop them into your 4-foot tank. Now, if you're made of money and you're gonna go and buy an existing colony already, or if you've got a colony already of your Neos, upsize your tank to a 4-foot. These are the perfect size to maximize the population to the point that you can sell and sell and sell, and they'll breed at the same or maybe a little bit less of a rate than people will buy them. So, if you're just starting out, 2-foot. If you've got a colony, 4. Then we've got to look at the second most important part of this game. It's the filtration. There's this weird misbelief that shrimp don't need a filter. I have no idea where that even came from. Obviously not someone that's breeding or smashing it with breeding. Shrimp, just like any other fish, need filtration. So I always over-filter my tanks. Whether you've got a canister filter or you've got like a sump filter or sponges, the best way to go about it is get massive filtration. I always run canister filters on all of my tanks and sponge filters on all of my tanks. The bigger and the more sponges, the better. You can never over-filtrate a tank. Now the keys here, guys, is if you've got a canister filter, little baby shrimp can get sucked up that intake. So you've got to put something around the intake, like a bit of sponge or a mesh net, so that your little babies aren't going to get sucked up and go through your filter and probably die. So the goal with filtration, maximize that and make sure your babies don't get killed. Next up is the feeding regime. Hikari algae wafers are the staple, the baseline diet. They're cheap and they feed heaps of shrimp. Zucchini is my hidden gem. I always feed every morning. I get a bit of zucchini, put it on a skewer or a fork and sink it in my tank. It gives you a bit of leeway. So if your shrimp eat all of the food or algae wafers that you fed them, they've got something else to munch on. You need to get yourself a good quality powdered food specific to shrimp that has a bit of calcium in it. Because what most people will do to increase the calcium for their shrimp, which is not the best practice, is they'll put shells or a substrate that's meant to leach calcium into the water. Remember, calcium in the water is not the same as calcium ingested by a shrimp to harden their shells and replace calcium from their lost molts. They need to eat that calcium. So whatever you put in that tank needs to be edible for the shrimp. What people do with the powdered food is they add bits of calcium into that food so the shrimp get a healthy life anyway. Now, your smaller baby shrimp, when you start really expanding your population, they'll need to feed on smaller food than algae wafers anyway, so it's good to have powdered food. The next step, and this is another very important key to keeping shrimp, is the nitrate, ammonia, or water parameter balance. So if you really want to do well in this hobby, you've got to learn the limit of your tanks. So when you're just starting out with your colony, you've got to learn the feeding limit. If you overfeed your tank, there'll be a bunch of uneaten food. What will happen is it'll increase the nitrates harsh in your tank, and it may even cause a crash. Or The food won't get eaten for ages. It'll float to the back of your tank and it will start to develop ammonia. Kills your whole colony. These are big no-nos. So here is your feeding routine. When you get your new colony, start with just an eighth, literally an eighth of an algae wafer twice a day. Or if you're home, 3 times a day. Put the algae wafer in and log in your brain where it lands. Then when it comes to the next feeding time, look where it landed. If it's totally gone, they are eating it, which means you're safe to put more food in. If they've eaten it totally, every single time you feed for about 3 or 4 days in a row, double the amount you're feeding. So instead of an eighth of an algae wafer, feed a quarter. Keep doing that until you start to notice uneaten food. That's your limit. Similarly, if you find every time you go to feed, they're not eating the food, you need to half the amount you're feeding. That way, you're playing with the population, so the amount that they're eating, right? And making sure they've got plenty of food so the mums feel safe and comfortable to have heaps and heaps and heaps of babies. That's your goal. There's 2 options you've got. A, don't test your water and you're kind of winging it because you don't know exactly what's going on. The only way to really solve that is water change more regularly. Or B, invest $40 into a nitrate tester kit and an ammonia tester kit. That way, every day you can test your water and see if you've got more than 40 parts per million nitrates, water change immediately. Nitrates build up through too much food or too much waste building up in your tank. Now, if you've got ammonia above 0, anything above 0, start searching for any uneaten food or any dead shrimp in the back of your tank. They tend to like crawl away or crawl under a rock and die under there, so you can't see them. It's horrible. Now, if there's too much ammonia in your tank, it will wipe out your entire colony. Don't let that happen. Next step, plants. Your baby shrimp are actually going to be consuming this bacteria that grows off of plants and driftwood in your tank. So when they're too small to eat any powdered food or any algae, all they do is they eat the bacteria that grows around mosses and plants. So the more mosses, the more plants, the more driftwood, the better. Now here's a really good hack. Most people, when they're breeding for profit, what they do is they just have a species only tank. That's great. But you can get this certain synergy if you can stack fish in your tanks. What I like to do is I get an exotic pleco. They're pretty expensive, but they eat any uneaten food from the shrimp. Plus, if it's an L333 or an L201, more of a meat-eating pleco, they won't eat your shrimp because they don't have the capability to. And what'll happen is if there's ever a dead shrimp, obviously it's going to float to the bottom of your tank. The pleco will eat that, which means the aquarist, the hobbyist, doesn't have to look into their tank to find the dead one. The L333 or the L201 will probably go and find it for you. Now, the reason I say exotic plecos is because if you get 2 or 3 of these guys, you can buy them for about $30 or $40 each in Australia, and then you just let them live in your colony. What happens is over about a year, they get to an adult size and they could either start breeding or you can sell them for $200, $250 a pop, depending on how big they are. So it's a great little money maker and tank saver community, and it's this builds this synergy between the two. Really good idea. Now, if you don't have the money to invest in that, just get a couple bristlenose and put them in the tank. They'll munch on your shrimp as well, on the dead shrimp. Now, the reason I talked about tank mates is because there is a limit to which tank mates you can keep. This is why people don't even risk it. They're like, nah, everything eats shrimp. If you go out in the wild, almost every fish will love to snack on shrimp. So if there's a fish with a mouth bigger than your shrimp, it's gonna eat it, which rules out almost every fish, except for pleco and bristlenose of any kind. Because these guys stick to the bottom of your tank and just cruise around, you don't have to worry about them predating on any of your shrimp, and they will just grow harmoniously. Now, the other thing is the temperature of your tank needs to be kept between 21 and 26 degrees. That's the optimum breeding temperature for shrimp. Anything lower than that, they can die. Anything higher than that, they start to not breed. I always keep my temperature at about 26 degrees because as it gets cold overnight, your heater pumping 26 degrees, it'll still be working and working and working, but sometimes the water in your tank drops. So if your heater's on 21 and it's working its hardest, the water may drop to 19 or even 18 degrees and the heater can't keep up with it, which means you may lose casualties. But if you go above that, in the wintertime, you're safe. In the summertime, drop it down so that if the temperature rises above 26, your heater's not adding to that heat. Now, if you're keeping them at 26, most pleco, most exotics will also thrive at that temperature. So it works perfectly. Now, this last part of this video is the geek out process. It's like what you really need to get your head around if you want to make good money. So I'll teach you about selling, I'll teach you about the grading of shrimp and the exact breeding process. We'll start there. There's two genders, male and female shrimp, to the limit of my knowledge. Your male shrimp will have more of a tapered body. So they're a bit thinner and it's a bit more of just a straight to their tail. Females will have their head and then they'll have a little bubble or a bump, like a fatter tail. That's how you can tell the males between the females. Obviously, when they're younger, they're a lot harder to tell the difference, but it's a good staple for when they're older. Now, the females will actually produce eggs on her own, and she'll keep them in her tail, or what's called her papillae. Well, there's like 30 different eggs just sitting in there under her tail. That is called your shrimp being berried, because it looks like all these little berries. Now, what the male does is he'll just cruise around the tank, and you should be able to see them every now and again. They'll float through the middle of the water of your tank. When they do that, most times they're actually putting sperm everywhere in all the tanks, so that your females, when they're just going about their day, those eggs slowly get fertilized. Once they're fertilized, this gestation period happens, which takes about 21 to 28 days, where the babies slowly form in the eggs, and then mum will disappear. When the eggs start to darken, mum will disappear into the deepest part of the moss she can find and have her babies. And then she'll come back out and the babies will just live themselves in that moss until they're big enough to come out and start eating your powdered food. So when you notice those berries starting to darken, it's go time. So the actual breeding process takes about 30 days per female shrimp, and once she's given birth, she can have her babies again. You'll notice in a really healthy tank, you've almost always got berried shrimp. This means you're feeding right, the water quality is good, there's plenty of plants, and you've listened to everything I've said so far in this video. Next up, how to increase the grade of your shrimp so that people buy for more. Now, believe it or not, there is amazing culture around shrimp. So there's different grades. There's low grade shrimp, which are kind of see-through. They've got splotches, they're a bit transparent, and they're not very striking. But the more colorful, the more deep the color, and the more solid the color is all the way through that shrimp, the higher the grading is. To improve the grade of your colony, you need to actively cull your shrimp. This doesn't mean killing them. It might mean taking them to another tank, or it might mean just selling off the less high quality ones. Now, what you're doing there is you're improving the quality of the breeders. So you've got males that are awesome colored, blue or yellow or red, and you've got females that are awesome colors as well. And the high quality ones, breed with the high quality ones. Guess what's gonna happen with the babies? High quality babies. So every single generation, there might be a better one and a better one and a better one. Your goal is to keep the good ones and get rid of the bad ones, which means the grade of your shrimp increases and you can sell for more and more and more and more and more. And once you have got the best quality shrimp in your area and you're selling for the best price in your area, you are monopolizing the market. A 4-foot tank for a certain color will help you totally monopolize the market in your area. Now, I live in a pretty populated part of the world, which means 4-foot tank gets me a good amount, and I seem to not be able to keep up with the amount that I'm selling, so I have to stop selling every now and again. But for most people, 4-foot will be enough to breed enough that you can sell to anyone and everyone that walks through your doors. If you've made it to the end of this video, it means you've learned every single thing you need to smash it in the shrimp breeding game. I hope this brings you a bunch of money. I hope you really get the hang of this. Any questions you've got, ask me in the comments. And if you've noticed I've missed something in my guide, let me know in the comments below. I help aquarists really make money with this hobby. This is no get rich quick scheme. This is a make money steadily every week, week in, week out, doing what you love. Link up with me on social media. Let's do this.